My own son spit in my face because I wouldn't hand him control of my life. He called me confused, frail, unfit. Then he forged my signature and dragged me into court like I was some burden to erase. But I didn't break. I built my case in silence, document by document, and in the end I made him choke on the one thing he thought he owned, his name. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The knife clinked gently against the china as Eleanor sliced the tuna salad sandwich diagonally, her movements slow, deliberate, and quiet, the way she'd always liked her afternoons. Outside, Tallahassee's humid air pressed against the window panes, cicadas humming like a warning. She set the plates down on the kitchen table, one for herself, one for her son Aaron, who didn't bother muting the sports highlights blaring from the living room. He glanced at the plate, curled his lip. "You still buying that cheap wheat crap?" he muttered, pushing the sandwich half-heartedly with one finger. "You know they have real bread at Publix, right?" From across the table, Jessica released a sigh so practiced it might have been rehearsed. She looked up from her phone and gave a pointed glance toward the TV mounted just above Eleanor's fireplace. "Is that still the same one from what? The 90s?" she asked. Voice syrupy, eyes sharp. Eleanor didn't answer. She buttered her own sandwich calmly, spreading it edge to edge like she'd done for over 40 years in her second-grade classroom. She'd learned then that silence often cut deeper than scolding. Aaron leaned back in the creaky wooden chair he refused to help her replace. "Look, can we just talk about this like adults?" he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a manila envelope, already creased from how often he'd waved it around lately. "Power of attorney. All it takes is a signature. Just one." "No," Eleanor said, not looking up. Her voice was even, like water running over stone. Aaron scoffed. "Jesus, Ma, you're being stubborn for no reason. This is for your own good." Jessica didn't speak, but she smiled, thin-lipped, as if she agreed. Or worse, as if she pitied Eleanor. Eleanor folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. "You said that last month when you wanted access to my checking account. That was different." Aaron's voice tightened. "This isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" Aaron stood abruptly, chair legs shrieking across the hardwood. His face flushed red, jaw clenched. "You know what? I'm done asking nicely." He slammed the envelope onto the table like it carried the weight of law. Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked at the envelope, then at her son, the same son she'd once rocked to sleep after nightmares, who now towered over her with veins bulging in his neck. "I said no." The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Aaron's fist tightened, and then without warning, he spat. A warm, wet sting landed just beneath her right eye. Jessica gasped, hand fluttering to her chest, but didn't move, didn't speak. For a second, the world went unnaturally still. The clock on the wall ticked once. The cicadas outside wailed like sirens, and Eleanor did what no one expected. She didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't shrink. She reached slowly for a napkin, wiped her cheek, and stood. She faced him, her only child, her boy who once brought her dandelions in grubby fists, and now stood sweating, puffing like a schoolyard bully who'd gone too far. "You just started something you won't finish," she said, voice low and clear. Her words didn't tremble, but Aaron did. The fireproof safe clicked shut with a deep, metallic finality, the kind that seemed to echo off the walls of Eleanor's modest home like a line being drawn in the sand. Inside it lay her will, her medical directives, and the unsigned power of attorney papers, now sealed away like toxins in a vault. She knelt on the floor for a moment longer, one hand resting on the safe, her breath steady, the carpet's fibers pressing into her knees. Outside, the sun had finally dipped beneath the trees, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. The evening air was sticky, the way Tallahassee always was in August, thick enough to make her skin feel damp even indoors. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Again, Aaron, 7:02 p.m. "You need to rethink this." Aaron, 7:16 p.m. "Mom, this isn't a game." Aaron, 7:30 p.m. "Answer your phone." Aaron, 7:42 p.m. I'm not asking again. Aaron 8:10 p.m. You're making a mistake you'll regret. Eleanor didn't reply. She placed the phone face down, then took her time washing the two untouched sandwich plates from earlier, scrubbing each one like they still carried the stink of what had happened at lunch. By the time the knock came, her hands were dry, her back was straight, and her eyes were calm. Nina Moore stood on the porch with a Tupperware container and a look that said she'd already heard everything. Her curls were frizzing in the humidity, and her I run on coffee and sass t-shirt clung to her chest with sweat. I brought muffins, she said. And questions. Eleanor opened the door wider. Blueberry, with lemon zest. Nina pushed inside, already scanning Eleanor's face for signs of battle wound. He didn't hit you, did he? No, Eleanor said quietly, but he might as well have. The two women sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Aaron had spat his fury hours earlier. Eleanor recounted everything in crisp detail. The demand, the insult, the spitting. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But her voice had a steel thread running through it that Nina didn't miss. That little bastard, Nina hissed, muffin untouched. You know I always thought he was slick, but I never figured him for this. He was my son before he was a bully. Eleanor said. I saw what I wanted to see. That's done now. Nina leaned in, her voice lowered. So what's next? Because you're not signing anything. Not after that. No, Eleanor said, tapping her fingers once against the tabletop. No more being walked over. The next morning, Eleanor found herself inside the cool, dusty hush of the public library, a sanctuary she'd nearly forgotten existed. The air smelled like old paper and citrus cleaner, the walls lined with quiet knowing. She asked the clerk for the legal reference section and settled into a corner with a high-backed chair and a stack of books thick as bricks. Terms like durable power, incapacity, and elder exploitation leapt off the pages. She read for hours, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Her eyes burned, but her pulse stayed steady. And then, just before the library closed, she found him. Daniel Ortiz, Esquire 5-star reviews. 10 years in elder law. Offices near the courthouse. But it was the client testimonial that stopped her cold, highlighted by a previous reader in fading orange ink. He doesn't lose. Eleanor circled the words slowly, the pen's ink pooling at the edges. She exhaled once, then whispered under her breath like a vow. Then neither will I. The bell above the glass door gave a soft chime as Eleanor stepped into the law office. Cool air washed over her, sharp with lemon-scented polish and freshly printed paper, a stark contrast to the choking humidity outside. The front desk was empty, but voices murmured beyond a frosted partition, steady and serious. She clutched her folder tightly to her chest, fingertips damp against the manila edges. Mrs. Price, a calm male voice called out. She turned. Daniel Ortiz stood in the hallway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened, legal pad in hand. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 50, with salt brushing the edges of his dark hair and deep-set eyes that studied without judgment. She followed him into a small conference room. No mahogany or pretension, just a simple table, a stack of legal books, and two chairs that didn't pretend to be comfortable. He gestured for her to sit. You brought documents? He asked. Eleanor slid the folder across. I kept records, bank transactions, texts, and the unsigned power of attorney he keeps waving around like a sword. Daniel flipped through the pages, nodding slowly, methodically. Has he made threats? Subtle ones. Then not so subtle. Her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers tapped once against the table. He spat in my face 2 days ago. Daniel's eyes flicked up, jaw tightening. He did what? Over lunch, she said. After I refused to sign. He said nothing for a long moment, then pushed his chair back and opened a drawer behind him. Out came a thick folder marked Protective Actions, Elder Abuse, and a pre-printed checklist. He handed her a pen. We'll revoke anything you've previously granted him. Banking access, health directives, informal permissions. You're going to put every wall between you and that man the law allows. Good, Eleanor said, her voice flat. Before Daniel could speak again, The door creaked open and Nina poked her head in, a mischievous smile tugging at her mouth. Hope I'm not interrupting. I brought backup. Eleanor laughed softly, tension cracking just slightly at the edges. You followed me. You're damn right I did. I don't trust that snake to play fair. She stepped in fully and handed Daniel her phone. That's the last text Aaron sent Eleanor. You'll want to read it. The message on the screen was short, ugly, and time-stamped. You think you're smart, but everyone slips eventually. Watch yourself. Daniel took a screenshot and forwarded to himself. That's enough for a preliminary protective order. Nina crossed her arms. Think they'll fight back? Oh, they will, Daniel said, tone even. But let them try. We'll meet them in court, and we'll be ready. He turned to Eleanor, his gaze steady. I want to file paperwork this afternoon. I'll submit an affidavit and notify the clerk that any incoming guardianship or property transfer requests need to be flagged. Eleanor nodded once. Do it. They finalized the forms in silence, the quiet broken only by the soft scratch of Daniel's pen and the occasional shuffle of paper. Outside, rain began tapping against the window, a soft, insistent rhythm like time running out for someone else. When the meeting ended, Eleanor walked out with her shoulders higher. She didn't smile, not yet, but there was something fortified in her silence, something that felt a lot like resolve. Nina walked beside her. You okay? No, Eleanor said. But I will be. They reached Eleanor's porch just as the rain stopped, the air thick and buzzing with mosquitoes. She stepped forward to unlock the door and froze. There, sitting perfectly centered on the welcome mat, was a foil-covered casserole dish. Broccoli cheese, if the scent was any indication. Jessica stood behind it, hands folded, hair freshly curled, smile as stiff as wax. Thought we should talk, she said sweetly. No hard feelings, right? Eleanor didn't touch the dish, but her hand found the screen door's latch and stayed there. The casserole dish still steamed through the foil, a pungent cloud of melted cheese and broccoli rising in the muggy air. Eleanor didn't flinch at the smell. She stood in the doorway, with the screen still latched, the cool air from inside brushing the backs of her calves. Jessica's smile faltered only slightly when she realized she wasn't being invited in. I wasn't sure if you'd eaten yet, Jessica said, shifting her weight in wedge sandals, balancing her purse and a Tupperware bowl like a woman performing domestic penance. Eleanor studied her. Perfectly pressed blouse, pearls sitting just so at the collarbone, lips painted a color that tried too hard to look natural. Behind her eyes, something small and twitchy danced. Not guilt, not kindness, something closer to desperation. Appreciate the thought, Eleanor said coolly, not moving to unlatch the screen. But I already had dinner. Oh, Jessica blinked. Well, you can freeze it. She gave a light laugh, as if that might ease the tension in the porch's thick air. It's my grandmother's recipe. Well, Aaron said you used to love it. Eleanor let that hang there, unmoved. Used to is doing a lot of work. Jessica swallowed, then smiled tighter, her voice lowering like they were old friends sharing a secret. Look, I know things got a little heated. Aaron was, well, he's been under a lot of stress, losing his job and all. You know how he gets when he's cornered. Like an animal, Eleanor said flatly. Jessica's breath hitched. Okay, that's fair. But he's trying. We both are. We'd really like to just move past everything. No more fighting. We're family. Eleanor tilted her head, watching the condensation bead on the casserole dish as it cooled. Family doesn't spit in each other's faces. The silence cracked open for a long beat. Jessica glanced behind her, toward the street, then leaned in a little too close to the screen. He regrets that. He told me. But dragging things into court? Lawyers? That's not you, Eleanor. That's not who you are. Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. You don't know who I am. Not anymore. Jessica's mask slipped for half a second, just enough for the contempt to peek through. But she caught it quickly and slid the smile back on. Just think about it. Okay, we could all start fresh. She placed the dish gently on the porch mat. Dinner's on us. Eleanor nodded once, slowly. "So's the cleanup." Jessica hesitated, clearly waiting for the door to open. It didn't. Across the street, Nina stood on her lawn like a sentinel, arms crossed over a faded Gators t-shirt, sunglasses low on her nose, eyes locked on the scene. She raised one hand, not a wave, but a warning. Jessica followed Eleanor's gaze and stiffened. "Tell Nina I said hi." "I won't," Eleanor said. Jessica turned and walked down the steps, her heels clicking like metronome ticks on concrete. She didn't look back. Eleanor watched her cross the sidewalk, climb into her sedan, and drive off, only for a familiar truck to cruise slowly down the block 5 minutes later. Errands. The tires rolled like a predator on the hunt, windows tinted too dark, music thumping low from within. He didn't stop, didn't wave, just circled the block like he owned it. Eleanor locked the door, pulled the casserole off the mat using a paper towel, and dropped it straight into the trash bin beneath the sink. The smell lingered, sour and buttery. She washed her hands twice. The doorbell rang again an hour later, but this time, no smile greeted her. Only a courier in a USPS shirt and a manila envelope marked certified mail. She signed, closed the door, and opened it beneath the kitchen light. Her fingers froze at the first line. Aaron Price versus Eleanor Price. Petition for adult guardianship. The envelope was still warm from the courier's hand when Eleanor stepped into Daniel Ortiz's office the next morning. Rain spattered the windows behind him, mist curling along the sidewalk like breath from something alive and angry. She didn't wait for greetings. She placed the petition on his desk like a detonator. Daniel scanned the header, eyes narrowing. "Petition for guardianship. They're saying I'm incompetent," Eleanor said, her voice low, controlled. "Unfit to manage my own life." Daniel didn't respond right away. He flipped to the second page, jaw tightening. "They're claiming cognitive decline, erratic behavior, medication confusion." Eleanor pulled her coat tighter around her. "I taught third grade for 35 years. I organized field trips, ran a faculty budget, raised a child who's now trying to gut my life like a fish. I don't forget my own prescriptions." Daniel pushed the petition aside like it smelled foul. "They'll have to prove incapacity, and we'll shred that in court." He reached for a legal pad, already scribbling names. "I want the names of your doctors, regular checkups, any specialists you've seen. We'll request statements on your mental and physical health." "I've got it all," Eleanor said. She pulled another folder from her bag. "Clean bills of health. Recent cognitive assessment too. Passed with flying colors." Daniel smiled for the first time. "You were ready. I used to supervise playgrounds full of screaming children and irate parents. I know how to see a storm coming." The door creaked open behind them. "Brought reinforcements," Nina called, striding in with a wet umbrella in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "And possibly muffin. I haven't decided which is more important." Daniel raised a brow. "You're always welcome, Miss Moore. Cut the Miss crap. I'm testifying." She tossed the envelope onto the desk. Photos, messages, and a screenshot of Aaron threatening her 3 months ago after she wouldn't lend him money for a business investment. It was a poker tournament in Tampa. Eleanor gave her a sidelong glance. "You keep receipts like it's your hobby." "I keep receipts because I'm tired of men like him thinking they can twist the truth until it breaks." Daniel nodded. "You'll testify. And I want one more, someone who knew Eleanor in a professional capacity." "I reached out to Barbara Sims," Eleanor said. "My old principal. She still runs trainings for the school board." "Perfect." Daniel clicked his pen. "The court needs to see a lifetime of competence, not just recent." Just then, Clara Benton, the courthouse clerk, stepped into the doorway, raincoat still clinging to her shoulders. She carried a single sheet of paper, like it was radioactive. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said, glancing between them. "But I thought you'd want this." Daniel took the page, scanned it, and stilled. "What is it?" Eleanor asked. Clara spoke gently. "I noticed something odd in Aaron's petition. A reference to medication inconsistencies." Claimed you misread a prescription 3 months ago and had to call poison control. Eleanor's brow furrowed. That never happened. Daniel held up the sheet. He submitted a medical log as evidence. It has your signature at the bottom. I never signed a medication log, she said. Ice flooding her chest. Clara stepped closer. The signature looked off, so I checked the court's digital intake system. That file was uploaded using a non-authorized external account. We tracked the metadata. Daniel tapped the keyboard furiously, pulling up the digital audit trail. He clicked open the document's properties. Uploaded by Aaron Price. He read aloud. Last modified by the same. No hospital source. No pharmacy header. Nina whistled low. He forged a medical record. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Yes, he did. And that turns this from a bad faith filing to fraud. Possibly a felony. Eleanor didn't speak for a moment. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, but her spine had gone rigid, eyes locked forward like a laser sight. He thought I'd be too scared to fight, she said quietly. Daniel smiled grimly. He's about to find out just how wrong he was. Clara slid the time-stamped metadata report across Daniel's desk, like she was placing a loaded weapon on the table. The forgery was uploaded at 11:14 p.m. on June 2nd, she said. Not from any medical facility. From a personal device logged into Aaron's email account. No encryption, no authorized source. Eleanor sat across from her, spine straight, hands folded tightly. The artificial citrus of Daniel's office cleaner did little to mask the stillness of yesterday's rain, still clinging to the window pane. The storm had passed, outside, at least. Daniel barely blinked, and it never came through a medical proxy. Nope, Clara confirmed. Just a PDF titled, quote, mommed_final.pdf. Nina snorted from the corner. Real subtle. Eleanor said nothing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a yellowed handwritten log, the real one, dated 2 days before Aaron's supposed incident. The paper smelled faintly of lavender detergent and thyme. No errors, she said firmly, passing it over. I double-check every dose. Always have. Daniel scanned both versions side by side, eyes narrowing as the forgery's inconsistencies leapt off the page. Misspelled medication names, altered dosages, a forged doctor's signature that looked like it had been traced from a prescription pad. Eleanor's supposed signature was crooked, the loop on the E sloppy, like someone trying too hard to imitate someone they never really looked at. This is textbook fraud, Daniel said. He submitted it as evidence in a legal filing. That's grounds for criminal charges and immediate dismissal. Good, Nina muttered. Let him drown in paperwork. I'm filing for a motion to dismiss the guardianship today, Daniel said, already typing into his laptop, along with an evidentiary sanction for bad faith filing and falsified medical records. He looked at Eleanor. You just went from defense to offense. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor let out a breath that didn't feel like a negotiation with gravity. Then let's go for the jugular. Later that afternoon, Nina returned with another folder tucked under her arm, expression smug. Brought dessert, she said, tossing the pages onto the table. Jessica's been posting on Facebook again. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Daniel leaned in, scanning screenshots printed in grayscale. One showed a wine glass held high with the caption, "Some crazy old bats don't know when to quit. We'll win. Wait for it." Another showed Jessica in a spa robe, tagged at a luxury hotel with the comment, "Guardianship prep requires self-care, right?" She tagged a beauty brand. Nina added, "Like she's getting ready for a photo shoot, not a courtroom." Daniel shook his head. "She just gave us motive. Public gloating and clear evidence of malicious intent. Not smart." "They never are," Eleanor said, flipping the page, "especially when they think no one's watching." Over the next few days the house got quieter, not empty, but less haunted. Eleanor started sleeping through the night again. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for months began to fade. Little by little, she made coffee in the mornings, trimmed her rose bushes, started rereading East of Eden, cover to cover, but the storm hadn't passed, not fully. One afternoon, Daniel called. "We're ahead," he said. Voice calm but careful. "But we keep the pressure on. He'll crack. They always do when the narrative slips out of their control." "I'm not letting up," Eleanor replied. They wanted a fight. Now they have one. That night, as she folded laundry in the den, fingers smoothing the collar of a blouse she hadn't worn since her last parent-teacher conference years ago, her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. But she knew the voice behind it. "Hope you like courtrooms." Jessica Eleanor stared at the screen, then walked to the trash and dropped the blouse inside. "You'll see one up close, Jessica," she whispered. "And you won't like it." Aaron strutted into the Leon County Courthouse like a man claiming his inheritance. His navy suit was tailored just a shade too tight across the chest, sleeves just short enough to show off his monogrammed cuffs. Jessica teetered beside him in heels too high for the polished tile floor, a beige trench coat cinched tight around her waist like armor. She clutched a binder in one hand and adjusted her pearl earrings with the other, smiling politely at the bailiff as if greeting a neighbor at a country club brunch. Their confidence reeked of borrowed perfume, expensive, artificial, and fading fast. Inside the courtroom, the air was cool and dry, heavy with the scent of polished wood, dust, and quiet judgment. Eleanor walked in through the side entrance, Daniel at her right, Nina at her left. She wore a navy blouse, gray slacks, and her late husband's gold watch, not for luck, but for grounding. She hadn't touched a drop of perfume or lipstick. She didn't need costumes, just the truth. Aaron's smirk slipped the moment he saw her. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and readers perched halfway down her nose, took her seat and began flipping through the docket. Case number 24GA211. The clerk called, "Petition for Adult Guardianship." Petitioner Aaron Price. Respondent Eleanor Price. Aaron rose, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, I'm here out of concern for my mother's well-being. I believe she's no longer able to make sound decisions regarding her medical or financial affairs." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You've submitted claims of cognitive decline, including an alleged medication error." "Yes, ma'am. I have documentation." Daniel rose calmly. "Your Honor, the document in question is a forgery. We have metadata proof that it was submitted using Mr. Price's personal email, not through any official channel. Additionally, we have the original medication record, handwritten, dated, and verified." He handed a packet to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, the leather straps of her purse squeaking as she adjusted her posture. The judge looked over her glasses. "Mrs. Price," she said to Eleanor, "can you tell the court your current daily routine?" Before Eleanor could answer, Jessica interjected. "She forgets things constantly. Misses appointments, repeats stories. Just last week she called asking me where her bank was located." The judge's gaze didn't waver. "That wasn't directed at you, Mrs. Price." Jessica flushed and sat down quickly. Eleanor's voice was steady. "I rise at 6. I walk a mile. I check the mail, water the roses, and read at the library. I've been studying elder law since June. I've met with attorney Ortiz weekly. I also run my own finances, and have for over 20 years. The judge turned to Daniel. "Do you have medical support for her capacity?" "I do." Daniel handed over another document, signed by Dr. Margaret Rowley, geriatric specialist. "Full cognitive health confirmed as of last month. No impairments, no conditions requiring oversight." The judge flipped through the papers for several long seconds. Then she closed the file and looked at Aaron. "I take forgery very seriously," she said. "We'll be launching a formal inquiry into that submission. Until then, I am not prepared to rule today, but I am leaning heavily against the petition." Aaron's face reddened, and Jessica clenched her jaw. "We'll reconvene in 2 weeks," the judge added. "In the meantime, all actions on Miss Price's estate are frozen." She banged the gavel once. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed under the late morning sun. Eleanor stood silently, the breeze catching wisps of her hair. Nina lit a cigarette without asking, a habit she only returned to during moments of victory. "Did you see Aaron's face?" Nina said, chuckling. Looked like someone told him the country club was out of lobster. Eleanor didn't answer. Her phone buzzed in her purse. Unknown number. She stepped away and played the voicemail, holding it to her ear. Eleanor didn't flinch when Aaron's voice snarled through her phone speaker again. She stood in her kitchen beneath the dim pendant light, the linoleum cool under her bare feet, the silence around her broken only by the slow hum of the refrigerator. "You'll regret humiliating me." She played it again, just once, letting every syllable brand itself into memory. Then, with precise fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Daniel. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Daniel Ortiz, received. Logging it now as harassment evidence. Keep everything. Don't delete a thing. She tucked the phone into her cardigan pocket and exhaled. Not from fear. Not anymore. But from focus. The message didn't shake her. It clarified something. Aaron wasn't going to stop. But neither was she. The next morning, Nina showed up in gym clothes with a toolbox under one arm and a box labeled Home Defender Pro under the other. "Bought it last year when my ex started dating that woman from the marina," she said, pushing past Eleanor. "Never used it, but I'm damn sure gonna use it now." They spent the next 2 hours installing cameras, one at the front porch, one at the back gate, another peering over the driveway. Each beeped softly as it connected to the Wi-Fi. Eleanor stood on a step stool, while Nina handled the app on her phone, her voice steady and light, masking her rising fury with dry sarcasm. "You know," Nina said, mounting the final bracket, "the last time I installed something like this, it was to keep raccoons out of my trash. I think Aaron's slightly worse." Eleanor offered a rare smile. "Raccoons at least have the decency to run when they're caught." Later that day, Eleanor pulled a new spiral-bound notebook from the hall closet, the kind she used to grade spelling tests with. On the front, she wrote in ink, "Document everything." She began journaling every detail. Calls, emails, the time Aaron's truck rolled by the house at 9:48 p.m. without stopping, the glance Jessica gave her at the grocery store. Each note written clearly, cleanly, with the precision of a woman who had nothing to hide and nothing to lose. That same afternoon, she opened her front door to find a folded piece of stationery wedged under the welcome mat. No envelope, no return name. But the handwriting was Jessica's, loopy, self-conscious, overly neat. "Eleanor, I know things have gotten messy. Aaron is just hurt. Maybe we all need to breathe. Let's not make this uglier than it has to be." There was no signature, just a heart at the bottom. Eleanor folded it once, twice, then dropped it into the drawer where she kept evidence. The heart was the same as the one Jessica used on their joint holiday cards. Nothing about it was accidental. That evening, as the sun spilled gold across the sidewalk and the cicadas resumed their choir, Eleanor visited the courthouse under the guise of checking on records. Clara Benton met her in the back hallway near the copy room, a folder clutched to her chest. "I shouldn't be giving you this," Clara whispered, handing her a printed memo, "but you didn't hear it from me." Eleanor scanned the document. The header read, "Request to unseal prior court records." Filed by Aaron Price. He had tried to dig. Not into her current case, but into old family probate files, her husband's will, a land transfer from decades ago. Files that were sealed for good reason. What was he looking for? Eleanor asked. Clara shook her head. "We flagged the attempt and denied access. But it means one thing. He's getting desperate." Eleanor slipped the memo into her bag and thanked her, the weight of what lay ahead settling just slightly deeper into her chest. She was halfway home, the sky fading into navy, when her phone rang. She pulled over beneath a street lamp and answered on the first ring. Daniel's voice was sharp, urgent. "The judge just called an emergency conference." Eleanor's breath slowed. "What happened?" "She won't say," Daniel replied. "But she requested we both be present tomorrow morning." And she used the word immediate. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them, muffling the outside hum of foot traffic and courthouse chatter. The judge's chambers were quiet. too quiet and lined with towering bookshelves that made even the air feel like it was holding its breath. Sunlight filtered in through slatted blinds, striping the Persian rug in alternating light and judgment. Aaron walked in first, his blazer crisp, mouth curled in a cocky half-smile. Jessica trailed behind, her heels too loud on the hardwood, her eyes darting from painting to bookshelf to judge. Anywhere but at Eleanor. Eleanor sat beside Daniel, her hands folded in her lap, wrists stiff with composure. She hadn't spoken since the door closed. She didn't need to. Judge Carolyn Reddick looked up from a stack of case files, reading glasses perched at the edge of her nose. Her stare didn't warm. "Mr. Price," she said, voice low and even, "before we begin, I want to be absolutely clear, this is not a casual discussion. This is a legal inquiry under judicial authority." Aaron straightened, smoothing his tie. "Of course, Your Honor." Judge Reddick picked up a stapled packet and held it between two fingers. "This," she said, "is the evidence submitted in your petition, the alleged medication mishap. It contains a signature that does not match official records, formatting inconsistent with medical reporting standards, and metadata linking it to your personal email." Jessica shifted, then coughed lightly, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her handbag. Reddick turned to Daniel. "Mr. Ortiz, would you please summarize your findings for the record?" Daniel stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Our investigation, aided by the court clerk, traced the file's creation to Mr. Price's personal account. The document was never received through a secure hospital channel, lacks physician authentication, and includes a falsified signature purporting to be Mrs. Price's. We also have the original document, verified by her physician, that contradicts every claim in the forgery." He handed over a file. Enclosed is the audit trail and statement from the doctor. Reddick reviewed it silently, flipping through pages with slow surgical precision. Then she looked up, her eyes narrowing at Aaron. "Care to explain why this forged document was submitted as part of a legal filing?" Aaron blinked. "I didn't forge anything. My mom said she had a mix-up with meds. I thought this was the log she gave me." Jessica jumped in too fast. "It was probably a misunderstanding. Aaron's not tech-savvy. Maybe he uploaded the wrong file." "Is that your sworn statement?" the judge asked, her tone sharpening. Jessica hesitated. "It's what I believe." Judge Reddick closed the folder. The sound was sharp, final. "Perjury and falsified filings carry criminal penalties. If I determine that either of you knowingly misled this court, you could face contempt charges, or worse." The color drained from Jessica's face. Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze never wavered, her hands still clasped like a woman waiting out a storm she'd already prepared for. Aaron's voice dropped to a defensive growl. "She's not of sound mind. She's letting that lawyer and our neighbor manipulate her. You're seriously going to believe she's totally fine?" "I don't need to believe anything," Reddick said calmly. "I have medical evaluations, witness testimony, and most importantly, your own digital fingerprints on a fraudulent document." The silence pressed down hard. Then the judge leaned back and steepled her fingers. "Given these developments, I'm ordering a full financial review of Mr. Price's recent activity. Bank records, asset transfers, credit histories, everything going back 18 months. Aaron snapped his head up. "What?" "That's standard procedure," the judge interrupted, her voice like stone. "When there's suspicion of financial exploitation, the court is obligated to follow the money." Daniel didn't hide his satisfaction. Jessica's knuckles whitened on her purse strap. Judge Reddick tapped her pen once on the desk. "I will reconvene in 10 days with findings. Until then, Mr. Price, you are not to contact Mrs. Price directly or indirectly. Do I make myself clear?" Aaron's jaw clenched. "Yes." Eleanor finally looked at him, and for the first time he looked away. As they stepped into the hallway, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She glanced down. "Nina." That looked like checkmate. Eleanor typed only 2 words in reply. "Not yet." Daniel laid the freshly printed bank statements across his desk like playing cards. 4 months of transaction history from 3 separate accounts, each one more damning than the last. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, but the silence between page turns was louder. Eleanor sat still in the chair across from him, hands clasped neatly in her lap, as if preparing for a test she'd studied her entire life for. Nina, on the other hand, leaned in over Daniel's shoulder with a coffee in one hand and barely restrained glee in the other. Daniel tapped one sheet, 3,200 withdrawn in cash at a poker lounge in Jacksonville. 5 separate visits in June alone. Eleanor blinked slowly. That's 3 days after he told me he couldn't afford groceries. Daniel didn't look up. There's more. Credit card tied to Jessica. Maxed out. 10,000 at high-end boutiques. There's a $980 charge at something called Glow and Glow Spa. He flipped to the next page. Oh, and here's a withdrawal the night before the guardianship petition was filed. $5,000 even. No purchase listed. Just a cashier's withdrawal. Let me guess, Nina said, voice like sharpened glass. He needed it to cover court fees. Or maybe buy himself another custom jacket with initials on the cuff. Daniel chuckled once, then stilled. It gets worse. He's been transferring small amounts out of an account Eleanor once co-owned with her late husband, closed years ago. Turns out he reactivated access using old paperwork, possibly without proper authorization. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. How long has that been going on? Daniel pointed. 6 months. He pulled nearly 9,000 before the bank flagged the activity. Nina gave a short, low whistle, flipping through the pages again. Boy's not just greedy. He's messy. Eleanor didn't laugh. She didn't scowl. She reached for the top document and studied it in silence, letting each number speak for itself. Her son hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a plan, and it was all unraveling now. Daniel picked up the phone and hit a speed dial. This is Ortiz, he said. When someone answered, we have motive. Strong financial abuse pattern, documented. Submitting to the judge's office within the hour. Eleanor didn't interrupt. She just watched him, eyes steady. Years ago, she would have cried over something like this. Now she found a strange sort of steadiness in the betrayal, a clarity. Love built on lies wasn't love at all. When Daniel hung up, Nina gave Eleanor a soft nudge with her elbow. Still no regrets. Only that I didn't start this sooner, Eleanor replied. She stood slowly, gathering the papers into a neat stack. But then again, he's the one who rushed to court. As if on cue, Daniel's office phone buzzed again. He answered, listened, then met Eleanor's eyes. It's the judge's assistant. You're being called to testify at the final hearing. They want your voice on the record. Eleanor didn't flinch. When? 3 days. Nina grinned. You ready for that? Eleanor nodded once. I was ready the day he spat in my face. The courtroom was cold that morning, not just in temperature but in tone, like the walls themselves had drawn in to witness what was about to unfold. Eleanor felt it the moment she stepped inside. That thick hush, that electric stillness. Even the overhead lights seemed harsher than usual, casting shadows where none should have been. Aaron sat at the plaintiff's table, arms folded, jaw tight. Jessica was beside him, lips pressed into a colorless line, her legs crossed like she was posing for a magazine cover. They didn't look at Eleanor when she entered, but Eleanor saw them. Daniel leaned in and whispered, you don't have to hold back. Say it all. Truth doesn't need polish. When her name was called, Eleanor walked to the witness stand without hesitation. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. Her shoes tapped gently against the tile, her cardigan buttoned to the top, her late husband's watch still snug on her wrist. She was sworn in. The court reporter adjusted her mic. And then, the courtroom exhaled. Daniel stood. Mrs. Price, can you tell the court why you believe this guardianship petition was filed? Eleanor looked directly at the judge, not Aaron. Because my son wants control, not out of love, not out of concern, but out of entitlement. And when I didn't hand it over, he tried to take it. A low shuffle moved through the room. Daniel nodded. Let's go back. Did something specific happen? Eleanor didn't blink. He spat in my face, Her voice didn't crack. Right in my kitchen. Because I wouldn't sign the power of attorney, called me useless. Said I owed him for everything. The room fell silent, tighter than before. She continued, calmly, clearly. Before that, it was years of little things. Pressure, manipulation. Trying to get me to move money. Redo my will. Said he'd handle everything when I was gone. If I'd just make it easier for him now. Daniel nodded. Did you? No, Eleanor said. Every time, I said no. And every time he got more forceful. She took a breath, then glanced down at the paper in her hand. I kept a journal of every call, every demand, every threat, including this. She hit play on her phone's speaker, holding it up. Aaron's voice crackled through the courtroom. You'll regret humiliating me. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A bailiff cleared his throat. Aaron shifted visibly in his seat, red rising in blotches up his neck. The judge said nothing, but she didn't look away either. Daniel approached the bench and handed over a folder. Bank records, unauthorized withdrawals, gambling expenses, a pattern of financial dependence on someone he claims is mentally unfit. Jessica buried her face in her hand. Eleanor looked down at Aaron for the first time. Her voice was soft now. He used to be a boy I read bedtime stories to, who needed me, who I would have done anything for. She paused. But the man sitting here? He's a stranger with my son's name. The judge finally leaned back. She didn't write. She didn't speak. She studied Aaron like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. I've heard enough, she said at last. I will issue a ruling within 48 hours. Gavel. Sharp. Final. Eleanor stepped down, steady as a clock. Daniel touched her arm lightly in passing, but she didn't stop walking. Behind her, Aaron muttered something under his breath. But no one was listening. While Aaron's phone lit up with unanswered calls and voicemail pings, Eleanor slipped on a pair of gardening gloves and stepped into the sun. The dirt was warm and loose between her fingers as she dug rows for purple salvia and creeping rosemary along the fence line. It was a bright, cloudless morning, the kind of day that tried its best to pretend nothing was on the line. Her phone buzzed again from the porch railing. Aaron, 8:21 a.m. We should talk before it's too late. Aaron, 8:47 a.m. You're making a mistake you can't undo. Aaron, 9:03 a.m. Mom. Eleanor turned the screen face down, then pressed a salvia root gently into place. Bloom anyway, she whispered to it. Inside the house, her answering machine had already collected 4 messages. She didn't listen. Instead, she brewed coffee and sliced lemons from her backyard tree, the juice soaking her hands in a citrus sting. By noon, Jessica had joined the show. Nina burst through the front door holding her phone like a smoking gun. She's on Facebook, posting vague-ass pity notes like she's the one being dragged through court. Eleanor wiped her hands on a dish towel. Let me guess, no names, but some people are trying to destroy their family? Exactly. Nina rolled her eyes. And emojis. Always the damn emojis. Eleanor shook her head, then turned back to her baking. The lemon bar crust was done, and the filling had just reached the right consistency. Tart, bright, and unapologetically bold. I'll take care of the truth, she said softly, pouring the filling into the pan. They can chase shadows if they want. Later that afternoon they went shopping, not for necessity, but for the sheer pleasure of pretending the world hadn't cracked open. Eleanor picked out a new sun hat, and tried on reading glasses she didn't need. Nina bought garden gnomes shaped like pirates, and insisted on putting one in Eleanor's front yard. I named him Due Process, she said, proudly stabbing it into the mulch. At a red light, Daniel called. Anything? Eleanor asked. Not yet, he replied. But I want you to be prepared. For what? Backlash. If they lose this, and I believe they will, it'll get loud before it gets quiet. He'll flail. I've faced worse, Eleanor said, calmly. Daniel hesitated. You've been the picture of strength, Eleanor, but just in case, let someone stay with you tonight. I'll be fine. Nina's 2 houses away, and my cameras work just fine. Daniel exhaled. Still, don't answer the door. Not until we know. That evening, Eleanor wrapped up a tray of lemon bars in wax paper and walked them down to the public library. The air smelled like sun-warmed pavement and cut grass. Inside, the head librarian, Mrs. Palmer, blinked in surprise when Eleanor handed her the tray. "What's this for?" "Just gratitude," Eleanor said. "And patience." And the quiet Mrs. Palmer smiled, then leaned in. "You know the courtroom staff is rooting for you, right? Clara told me. We've all seen them. Men like him." Eleanor smiled back. "Then they'll enjoy the ending." As the sun slipped behind the trees, and the sky burned peach and lavender, Eleanor returned home. She took a long, slow shower, changed into her softest flannel robe, and curled up with East of Eden once more, her finger tracing lines of text she'd memorized years ago. Ipsas. Once a best 60 memorized years ago. The phone rang just past 8. It wasn't Aaron. Daniel's voice came through, calm but electric. "The judge has ruled," he said, "and it's in writing." Eleanor sat up straighter. "I'm coming over," Daniel added. "You'll want to read this with both eyes open." The courtroom was colder than usual, not from air conditioning but from something deeper, like justice itself had settled into the walls, quiet and immovable. The hum of anticipation was low but pulsing. Reporters had gathered near the back in silent rows, pens ready. Even the bailiff seemed on edge, standing straighter than necessary. Eleanor sat still, her palms flat on her skirt, her breath slow and measured. She wore no jewelry except for her wedding band, which she had slipped back on that morning, not for nostalgia but for closure. The metal felt heavier now. Aaron entered 5 minutes late, as if the extra time might help him regain control of the narrative. His tie was crooked, the color in his face uneven. Jessica walked 2 steps behind, eyes red-rimmed, makeup already on the edge of surrender. Daniel didn't say much. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and gave Eleanor a quiet nod. She didn't return it. She didn't need to. They were past signals now. Judge Reddick entered through the side door, robe swaying, expression unreadable. She didn't waste time. "This court has reviewed extensive documentation, testimony, medical evaluations, and financial records over the last 6 weeks," she began, voice clipped but powerful. "The petition for adult guardianship, filed by Mr. Aaron Price, is hereby denied." The word echoed. Aaron blinked. Jessica sucked in a breath. Somewhere behind Eleanor, Nina whispered, "There it is." The judge continued, her tone hardening. "The court not only finds Mrs. Eleanor Price competent and fully capable of managing her affairs, but also recognizes a pattern of targeted psychological coercion and financial manipulation against her by the petitioner." She glanced down at the paperwork. Evidence submitted by Mr. Price included a forged medical log and falsified communications, which this court deems intentional and malicious. As such, Mr. Price, you are fined $7,500 for filing fraudulent documents and engaging in harassment. Aaron's face flushed deep red. "Your Honor, I didn't." "Be quiet," she snapped. "You may speak only when addressed." Jessica suddenly buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. The judge turned to Eleanor now. "Mrs. Price, you retain full legal autonomy. You are hereby granted 2 civil protective orders, one against Mr. Aaron Price and one against Mrs. Jessica Price, effective immediately. Neither party may contact you directly or indirectly, in person or digitally, without violating the terms." Eleanor nodded once, slow and dignified. She didn't blink, she didn't look toward them. The judge tapped her gavel. "This hearing is concluded." The courtroom began to stir as people stood and collected their things, murmurs rising like waves. Aaron remained seated, fists clenched against the table. Jessica whispered something to him, but he shook her off. Daniel stood beside Eleanor, pulled a crisp folder from his case, and walked it to Aaron. "You'll need to sign the formal ruling acknowledgement," he said. "You can take it home, but you have 72 hours. I suggest you read it twice." Aaron took the folder but didn't open it. Eleanor didn't look at her son, as she stood. She simply turned to Daniel and said, "Let's file it." He raised an eyebrow. "You're sure? Positive?" 2 days later, the papers were stamped. At the Leon County Clerk's office, Clara slid the file across the counter with a curious glance. "Everything's squared away." Eleanor smiled, warm but quiet. "It is now." The documents were straightforward: updated will, property designation, medical directives, and trust restructuring. But at the bottom was the final line that redefined everything: estate name, Eleanor May Whitmore, formerly Eleanor Price. She had gone back to her maiden name. Daniel looked at her as they exited into the Tallahassee sun. "You didn't even flinch when you signed it." "I flinched the first time I gave it up," Eleanor said. "Now I'm just taking it back." They walked in silence for a while, before Daniel asked, "What do you think Aaron will do when he sees it?" Eleanor paused outside the courthouse steps, the building towering behind her like an old giant that had finally chosen a side. "Oh," she said, slipping her sunglasses on, "he'll choke on it." The pen moved smoothly in Eleanor's hand, each stroke elegant, deliberate, and final. The thick legal paper smelled faintly of toner and lemon disinfectant. Sunlight streamed through the elder law office's wide windows, warming the brass edge of Daniel's desk, as if blessing the moment. She placed the pen down softly, like setting a weight she no longer had to carry. Daniel leaned forward and turned the page toward him. "That's it," he said. "Your trust is now under Eleanor May Whitmore. All assets, house, investments, pensions, retitled accordingly. You're no longer bound to Aaron or the Price name in any legal capacity." Eleanor looked at the signature at the bottom of the document. Eleanor May Whitmore, her mother's name, the name she'd tucked away when she married for love, real love, not the twisted bargain her son had tried to trade in. She traced it gently with one finger, as if relearning her own skin. Daniel watched her for a moment. "You sure you don't want a ceremonial bonfire for the old papers?" he joked. "Too messy," she said. "Shredding is more surgical." They drove in silence to her house. Nina was already waiting on the porch, sunglasses perched on her nose, paper shredder plugged into a long orange extension cord trailing down the steps. "I brought wine," Nina said, hoisting a bottle, "and a confetti attachment for the shredder." "No confetti," Eleanor smiled. "Just destruction." They set up in the living room. The stack of old files was thick, past versions of her will, old joint accounts with Aaron's name scrawled in the margins, copies of medical proxy forms she'd once signed in blind trust. Nina fed them into the machine one by one. The shredder hummed, chewed, spat ribbons. "Goodbye to the guilt folder," Nina muttered, feeding in a document labeled Power of Attorney. "Draft 1. Goodbye to the obligation folder," Eleanor added, dropping in a dusty manila envelope titled Aaron's Insurance Correspondence. They laughed as they worked, but not the light, forgetful kind of laughter. It was heavier, cleansing, like wringing water from soaked fabric. When the last page vanished into shreds, Eleanor exhaled and looked around her home. Nothing had changed. The same rugs, the same curtains, the same humming refrigerator, but everything felt wider, like the walls had taken a step back. That evening she took a walk, no keys gripped tight in her fist, no glancing over her shoulder for headlights or shadows, just her steps on the sidewalk, and the breeze curling around her, thick with honeysuckle and damp summer earth. She passed the park, the empty benches, the fading chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a backyard nearby. She paused at the edge of the lake, where ducks drifted like punctuation marks on still water. The air smelled like moss and early dusk. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Clara, filed and confirmed. "Attached is your signed estate packet. Welcome back, Miss Whitmore." Eleanor stared at the screen. She didn't respond right away, just stared at that last name like it was an old friend who'd come to sit beside her. Later that night she returned home to find a single cream envelope poking out of her mailbox. No return address, but the scrawled handwriting was unmistakable. She brought it inside, set it on the table, didn't touch it for 5 minutes. Then she opened it with the same calm she'd used to walk into court. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One line typed in bold, "Notice of appeal, filed by Aaron Price, ruling to be challenged on grounds of undue influence and judicial bias." Beneath it, a stamped hearing date. Eleanor folded the paper in half, then again. The corners didn't tremble in her hands. She placed it next to her lemon bar recipe, poured herself a cup of tea, and stared out the window. She wasn't afraid of him anymore, but she was ready. The letter sat unopened on Eleanor's kitchen table for less than an hour. She'd stared at it like it was a weed pushing through her garden, unwelcome but unsurprising. When Daniel called that afternoon, she answered before the second ring. "I read the filing," he said without preamble. "The appeal's weak. Emotional language. No new evidence. He's grasping at splinters. Will it go anywhere?" she asked, pouring hot water over a waiting tea bag. The scent of lemon balm rose gently into the air. "Unlikely," Daniel said. "The judge's ruling was thorough. The court already noted the fraud, the financial motive. The appeal will be reviewed, but I don't see it overturning anything." "Then let him scream into the wind," Eleanor said calmly, stirring her cup. "I'm not chasing ghosts." Daniel paused. "You've handled this with more grace than most people I know, especially after what he pulled." "It wasn't grace," she replied. "It was fury, just better dressed." By late morning, Nina was at her door with a pitcher of fresh lemonade, 3 glasses, and a thick envelope of printed Facebook drama. "You need to read what Jessica's saying now," she said, breezing past Eleanor into the kitchen. She posted a quote this morning that said, "Sometimes family stabs you in the front," with a crying emoji. Eleanor chuckled as she took a glass. Didn't realize self-awareness was catching. She also posted a throwback photo of Aaron holding a puppy with the caption, "This man deserves better than betrayal." "I think the puppy deserves better," Eleanor muttered. They sat at the kitchen table, lemonade sweating in their glasses, the windows open to a warm Tallahassee breeze. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower hummed, and the smell of cut grass drifted in, mingling with the lemon and honey on Eleanor's hands. "I didn't think I'd feel this light," she said finally. "Not after all that. You cut the cancer out," Nina said. "Now you heal." The doorbell rang just before noon. Eleanor opened it to find a thin, smiling delivery woman, holding out a manila envelope and a plastic-wrapped card. "Signature, please," the woman chirped. Inside the envelope were 2 things. Her new state ID, Eleanor May Whitmore, and beneath it a gold-embossed certificate, declaring her trust officially active, under her maiden name. She held the ID up to the light. The woman in the photo didn't look like a victim. She looked resolved. Eleanor placed the envelope in her keepsake drawer, next to her journal. Then she opened the cover to a fresh page, and began to write in sharp, deliberate strokes. August 22nd. "He spit in my face. Now he drowns in his own lies. Let him appeal. Let him shout. I'm not his to win or lose anymore." She closed the journal, not with a slam, but a click. That evening the sun hung low, casting gold across the lake, as if someone had spilled honey across the horizon. Eleanor walked the winding path past the library, and the old pine that still creaked in the wind. Her sandals scuffed gently against the gravel, as she reached the bench overlooking the water. She sat. No phone, no folder, no tension in her shoulders. The lake was still save for the occasional dragonfly flitting across its surface. Wind stirred the reeds in gentle sways, and somewhere across the water, a duck splashed playfully. Eleanor didn't move for a long time. She simply watched. Behind her the world kept spinning. Appeals would be filed. Gossip would spread. Aaron would rage. Jessica would post. But none of it could touch this moment, this silence, this seat she earned with every inch of dignity they tried to strip from her. She leaned back, exhaled and smiled, not from victory, but from relief. Because peace wasn't something handed to her. She carved it. Letter by letter, step by step, shred by shred. And as the last of the sun dipped below the trees, Eleanor whispered the words aloud, just for herself, just once. "He tried to take my name. I gave him a legacy of shame.